So welcome again. My name is Kim Marie. I never have thought of myself as funny. So it was kind of a surprise to me when I did the first Evolutionary Astrology conference and people started laughing. You know, my family considers me to be the serious, responsible, oldest child. And so this has been a surprise for me to be thought of as any type of comedian. So thank you all very much for honoring me that way. I'm going to do it different than I did yesterday, all right? We're going to work with the last four planets. And so they're going to put the chart up. We're going to work with one chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you some brief background on this chart. And then I'm going to start with the other four planets, their archetypes, how we work with them when they're retrograde. Then we'll apply them to this actual chart so that you can start to get feedback on how we work with the planetary retrogrades when we're working with mostly unconscious planets. Now, because I have done evolutionary astrology for so long, I can't look at a chart without starting with Pluto. Pluto is just the first thing I zero in on. And so we're going to do these planetary retrogrades the opposite. We're going to do Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, then get to Sag, all right? So thank you for allowing me to do it that way as well. So let me just get myself orientated, make sure I got my chart. Yep, all right. So this is a person, female, who has been a recent client of mine. The chart will not tell you two things. It will not tell you gender, nor will it tell you the evolutionary condition of the soul. You must always do the live interaction, the observation correlation. And I'm always teaching people when they're first starting out as an astrologer, do not feel afraid to ask questions. You can ask as many questions as the client. And if you're first starting out, hey, you know, you can give yourself a more reduced rate. It attracts people in, and you say, hey, I'm learning, so I'm going to ask as many questions. And then you don't have to have any of that Virgo guilt about it, as we say. And so I've learned to do that over the years. And then after a while, you start to get smoother and smoother at it, and you just kind of bring it out through the course of the reading. But this client, right before she called me, it was a few months earlier, and I needed to prepare for this lecture. And I just said, Spirit, you know what? I'd really like a chart where all four of the last planets were retrograde. And within 2 days, this person emails me and says, I'd like a reading from you, and I'd like to upgrade on the correspondence course, and I want to come to the conference. So there's a clue for you, okay? So when we start out with looking at a chart, we always want to take into consideration, beyond the evolutionary state, all of the environmental conditioning. And if you look up, let me see, I got to orientate myself to this. If you look up here, Chicago. This person was born and raised in Chicago, did not live there in their adulthood, but she was born and raised there, and she's an Irish Catholic. Came from a very strong Irish Catholic household and middle class. Now, in regards to the evolutionary state, I want to start off and tell you what I thought was a very sweet story, and I think you will see some of the correlations that will come from this. I relate to it because I am the Pluto and Virgo generation, but if you look at this chart, you will see we have a Pluto in Leo, but it's in the 6th house, all right? It's in the Virgo house. And so I did the reading for the client, and then after the reading, I asked her, I emailed her back, and I said, would you mind if I used your chart for the conference? And she was like thrilled. And so then I said, well, let's get on the phone and let's do some more conversations. And so I'd had the luxury, okay, of doing an hour-long reading with her. And so we just conversed back and forth, and she gave me a lot more detail of family history, etc. But one of the questions that I asked her, I says, and so in your studies of EA, what evolutionary state do you consider yourself to be in? And she said, first stage individuated. And my little I went, okay, okay. Well, what makes you think that? And so she started to tell me some things. And so as we go in and discuss more details, you'll start to see all these retrogrades that we're going to talk about, see where they all are in the chart. And if you start to then correlate some of these signs and houses and all of that information in there, as we went through the course of the conversation, she was then able to get to the point that what she really is third stage individuated, making the transition into the spirituated state. But this was an example of when you find Pluto in Virgo or Pluto in the 6th house, that self-deprecation that will go on. When we talk about all of that patriarchal or human-made conditioning, where I know better, but I still make myself be less than. This is a strong indicator for you as we tend to go through this chart. And so I was surprised that this woman would even consider herself to be there. But can you see how with the intensity of the retrogrades, there's 5 retrogrades in this chart. And so can you imagine the amount of resistance and relive and the conditions that this person is going through in her life? And so she was just automatically putting herself less than, sometimes due just to the repetition of the experiences that she was going through. So many of us, when we are wounded from the human-made conditioning, we will overly develop our spiritual bodies and our mental bodies at the expense of our emotional bodies. And as you've heard Jeffrey say, then we go through emotional catch-up. Probably every one of us in this room, to some extent, has had to go through this emotional catch-up. And so we can again see this with these 5 retrogrades here that we're going to talk about, that she's had to do a lot of catch-up. And so these were some of those indicators that she would have a tendency to have resistance to growth, a tendency to put herself as less than what she really is. Again, one of the most dominant factors doing that is just the 6th house Pluto, the 6th house soul representation. All right? So, this person, let me do this for you, okay? I'm a spontaneous speaker. I just let it come out how it wants to come out and just trust Source to channel it through in the best way. So what I'd like to do is start going through the planetary archetypes just because of the time factor, and then I'll start bringing in more details about her actual life experiences and what she is going through in regards to all of this. So, remember, retrogrades. It was, you put the re in front of everything. You are reviewing, you are re-experiencing, you are re-evaluating. There is something that has to be somehow repeated or thrown off. There has to be the withdrawal to go within, to figure something out, to figure out what is there that needs to be released, let go, withdrawal. That's all from yesterday. We can all be pretty much familiar with that. Let's start out right away with Pluto. Pluto has a 248-year revolution around the sun. Takes Pluto 248 years to go around your chart. Never makes it in a single lifetime. It has a 160-day retrograde cycle, a little over 5 months. Its stationary time period is 7 days. It appears to stand still in the sky from Earth's viewpoint for 7 days when it goes retrograde, for 7 days when it goes direct. And what will have a tendency to happen here is, as we work with Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, these are the planets that belong into the realm of the unconsciousness. So it takes some work to be aware of these planets in our chart. Where we have a tendency to notice them is when they go retrograde and when they go direct. They will have a tendency to bring up those life-altering events or ahas that go on in your chart. So we all briefly know Pluto, the soul, and it's the evolution of the soul that always needs to take place. And what will happen when you have almost half of the planet born with Pluto retrograde? Should we all raise our hands? Here we go again. So, okay. So that means almost half of society is never buying into the status quo. Almost half of society on a deep soul level is always in a process of what we know as dissatisfaction, rebellion, breaking free. One of the main signatures of Pluto retrograde is dissatisfaction. And so those of you who are born with Pluto retrograde, there seems to be this continual dissatisfaction that will go throughout your entire lifetime. And so think about it. We have the dual desires, the desire to separate and the desire to return. And we go through one of those desires to separate, which is the new car, the new lover, the job, okay? Be human here. And so we achieve that desire. We have that momentary sense of satisfaction. What is it replaced with? dissatisfaction. What else? What next? And we go through replacing that sense of dissatisfaction with another desire and another desire and another desire, usually of a separating nature, until finally we start to exhaust those separating desires enough that we go within and we start to desire from within. We start that path to no source. Why am I here? What is that which made me? Well, this sense of dissatisfaction that we will all feel is intensified with a Pluto retrograde. And so again, this is one of the most basic ways that you can know when you have Pluto retrograde as to what this is in your soul, how this is represented. We start to personalize it when we start to put Pluto in a house and we start to put Pluto in a sign. Now we have a Pluto in Leo here, okay? And you know the cookbooks would tell you Pluto in Leo is just full of themselves. But start looking at what we've got going on in this chart. We have Pluto in the 6th house, and we have these 5 planets retrograde. And where are all of these retrograde planets? They're all right here on this western half of the horizon as it's known, which is others. All right? So just by polarity, can you see how all these retrogrades are pointing to self? But because she has all of these planets retrograde here over on the relationship side of the chart, this is a woman who, as I started questioning her, says that, you know, she spent her whole life giving to others. And what has been one of her most basic lessons on a soul level with the Pluto retrograde in the 6th house, she's had to learn when to stop serving others and when to start serving herself. Now I'm going to skip around and I'll come back to things. I'm going to skip around with the details of her life, all right? This is a woman who turned out to be financially successful in how we look at it in U.S. terms today. And so what happened is she had all of her other family members that would always be coming to her for financial loans, especially her younger brother. She has one daughter, and the daughter came into the situation always wanting money from mom. And when she has one marriage, that marriage lasted 16 years, dissolved, and now she's in a relationship with someone else. We'll get to that later. But when she had her daughter, her husband, her ex-husband, stopped working. And she supported him the rest of the marriage until she finally had enough of it. And she said, you know, I am tired of this relationship like this anymore. I am tired of always taking care of you and nurturing you and mothering you and not getting any of it back. So you see, can you see some of these details in here as I'm saying this? Another detail for you. This person released an addiction to alcohol a little over 19 months ago. She released an addiction to cigarettes a little over 6 months ago. We'll talk about this throughout the whole thing, but again, the Irish Catholic background, raised in Chicago, children of that social history and culture are brought up with alcohol. There's no taboo that you must wait till you're 18 or 21. You're brought up with it as a child. You're allowed to have a little bit of the liquor that your parents drink all the way through your life. In other words, it took this client, we can see Neptune in the 8th retrograde to jump ahead to give you some pointers for that, and also this Sun in Pisces right here, and these 3 planets in the 12th house. It took this client a while to even recognize that she had an addiction to alcohol, because it was so much in the culture of her family. It wasn't even objected to. It wasn't even looked at. As a matter of fact, when she admitted it to her mother, who is an alcoholic, was still in denial and telling her that there was nothing wrong with her in regards to this. And so when I was asking her questions, I says, well, do you know why it is that she felt that she needed the alcohol? What led you to these addictions? And her response was, because I did not want to feel anything, and I did not want to have to process anything. 5 planets retrograde. Do you think she had any choice about having to go in and process? She resisted it a long time. And once she released that addiction, she has been having clarity come through just in lightning rates for her. See transiting Uranus right here, see transiting Neptune right up here. She just has been having light bulbs of insight about her whole life coming on for her. And she rediscovered the Pluto books. And she went back and reread them and decided, I've got to do the course again. When I had done the reading for her earlier, it was like the thing that was just like the driving force in her life. This light had come on that she was doing the real one-on-one connection with Source in her own way within. And a key for her was just the study of evolutionary astrology. And so that was my first clue. Hey, this gal is beyond first stage individuated. And just the way she said it when I had the reading, my gosh, this gal is going to catapult did I say that right? Into the first stage spirituated as she has reached her sobriety, as she has really started to get real and get in touch with all the emotions. But let's go back now again to this Pluto retrograde that we are looking at here. You know, when you have Pluto in the 6th house or Pluto in Virgo, you're never ready. You're never satisfied. So now we put Pluto in the 6th house and we make it retrograde. Can you see this dissatisfaction that's always there? This is someone who feels that she's never good enough, never smart enough, never ready enough, never whatever. And yet if you would observe her on an outer level, she is very successful in very many ways, but she does not see herself that way. And so that dissatisfaction that gets intensified with here, where is this polarity point pointing towards? It's pointing towards this 12th house. It's pointing towards a soul that needs to learn to have a deep inner relationship with Source, with God, Goddess, with whatever she considers it to be, because that is the only thing that is going to satisfy that sense of dissatisfaction. So all of these retrograde planets are starting to accelerate this desire to go back to Source, to find self. It just starts to accelerate all this side of the chart. Everybody following this? Following? Am I clear enough with this archetype of Pluto? Okay. Few questions. Any questions? All right, you're tired. You want to go home. You want to party, huh? So, again, Pluto retrograde will mean somewhere located by house and sign. There is an intense dissatisfaction. There is an intense rebellion to the status quo. There is an increasing intensity to evolve. Remember, all retrograde planets in some form or manner will represent an increasing of evolvement in whatever's the next way necessary. You had a question, hon?
Yeah. Is she in any sort of recovery or 12-step program that you're aware of in terms of...
You know what? I did not ask her that question. Oh, no, wait a minute. I do remember that. She had done some, if I'm remembering correctly, she has done some AA stuff in the past. And she told me that for a long time, she went through a lot of years where she was a real loner. Okay, we'll get into that with Uranus retrograde. Okay, and all of these 4 outer planets to some extent. And so she didn't find fulfillment with the AA groups. And now in this last time period that she's went over the last year and a half, she has found an AA group that's more spiritually based, that's supportive for her, that she's relating to on a better level. Okay. Other questions? All right, so we'll move on then. Let's move on to Neptune, all right? Neptune is the archetype of transcendence. It's the archetype, what I like to tell my students in astrology is when you go to look in your natal chart where Neptune is, by house and sign, that is where you are trying to find a direct personal relationship with God, Goddess in this lifetime, and that is the avenue to figure out the closest way to do it. Neptune will represent the conscious unconsciousness on a collective level. And that contains 3 types of groupings. It contains a collective consciousness, unconsciousness on a racial level. It's different being white versus being black versus being Indian. It will contain it on a national level. It's different being an American versus being a Canadian. And then it will also contain a collective conscious unconsciousness on a human level or on a species level. So we come through with, via Neptune, 3 types of collective conscious unconsciousness: racial, national, human. You can break the national down into little subsets of different groups, like the Southeast is different than the Northwest in the United States. But Neptune is where we start dissolving all those boundaries. We don't have to go through a lot of detail here. You've heard a lot about it over the weekend. It's in the dissolving of that boundaries and a soul's desire to be secure. It can be scary to have those boundaries dissolved, especially when we're left in the void before anything replaces it. And we're left in that void deliberately so that we learn to find source in some way. And so we have a tendency to not like that void, so we will want to buy into our Neptunian illusions, delusions, fantasies, etc., etc. So when we find Neptune retrograde, there is a heightened sensitivity to all of this stuff. There is a heightened sensitivity to everything that is represented by Neptune. The left brain level, Neptune has a 165-year revolution around the sun, which means 165 years to go around your natal birth chart. Again, doesn't make it in a lifetime. It also has a 7-day stationary period when turning retrograde and when turning direct. It goes retrograde for 157 days, and that's approximately 5 months again, so it does this on an annual basis. All right? So again, when Neptune goes retrograde, either by transits, by progression in your natal chart, or you're born with it natally, then it is an opportunity to let go of your illusions, your delusions. That's the purpose. It's trying to throw off sometimes what I like to call any of your illusions of separation from source. However, we've bought into that stuff. When Neptune is retrograde, that is a time period where we can figure that out. Now, for those in which that is too intense to do that, what we can do during a Neptune retrograde is buy into the illusions, delusions even more intensely. When we try to do that, it will lead to even greater levels of depression and just what is the meaning of life. Losing an ability to just connect yourself in with any type of interaction with life at all. So again, that Neptune retrograde, as we work to release those separations from source, what Neptune retrograde can actually point to is a greater connection to God, Goddess, of actually being able to have that come into us so that we know it, not through the Jupiterian belief system, but just through the knowing, through the connection, through the heart, through the soul. So Neptune retrograde will also be an indicator of helping us try to get to what we know in EA as karma yoga. Neptune, 12th house, Pisces points to Mercury, Virgo, 6th house. So it will point to what is healthy work for us, what is work of service to us on the planet. And again, I like to tell people, especially when they're in the individuated state, all work is spiritual work. It's your approach and your attitude to it. All work is of service to source. And if you need an example, Mother Teresa. The lowest work that you could do for some people, and yet she made it some of the greatest spiritual work on the planet that you could imagine. When we look at this chart right here, for this client right here, you see Neptune. We'll talk about this some more, but we'll start right here with Neptune. See Neptune in Libra, retrograde, 8th house. Neptune in Libra, you know, all the illusions we've bought into relationships. In that 8th house, I sometimes will call that 8th house the house of codependency. You know, what's the 2nd house? Self-reliance. When we're not self-reliant, what are we? Codependent. You know, whether that codependency is another person or a body of knowledge or a job or money or whatever it is. Now look at here how Mars is balsamic to Neptune. This, remember what we said when Mars is retrograde? Sometimes early on for these souls, there's a lack of willpower. Well, this client did not know what she wanted to do when she grew up. And she went to college. Her parents paid for college. And when she graduated, her father said, "You are now off the payroll." And she went into a panic attack. What am I going to do? She had a degree in Spanish literature and anthropology. If that's, you know what I mean. So it was like, well, what am I going to do with that? You know, and so she went through, I don't remember what her earlier jobs were, but when her Saturn return hit, she ended up getting a job at a major bank because she spoke Spanish. And the bank trained her to be a financial consultant. And so she is really an investment counselor for foreigners in the United States. And that was her whole career. And she's reached a point of being able to retire real soon here and to then go and pursue the stuff in life that she really wants to pursue. So again, what we will sometimes find when planets are retrograde is there's a delay in figuring out some of the things that we want to do. So again, you can see Neptune, 8th house, Mars, balsamic that, 8th house. You can see the financial connection, see Libra, see relationships, see the financial counselor and investor and helping with that. Can you again see where I'm tying in, where people would always come to her for money? And you know what her response early on was? She felt guilty being so financially successful that she was always giving money to her family. She was always taking her family on trips. She was always giving money to everyone who came and asked her for it. As a matter of fact, one of the things that she did, and it's been a lesson for her as Neptune has transited through her 12th house, is she had a junior partner when she was still in her days of addiction. She had a junior partner that she brought into the organization, and she allowed him to take advantage of her and to take things from her on a work basis that affected her financially. So she's had these lessons of learning how to say, I don't owe you any more money. I don't have to give up my success to feel worthy. See, am I painting the picture clearly enough for you so you can use all of this stuff? And so again, here's this Neptune in the 8th house, retrograde, Libra. People come to her asking for money, and she's feeling that she needs to be responsible for them and give it to them. See how she's buying into that type of an illusion? Especially if you come from any type of pretty much a westernized background in regards to spirituality. It's the vow of poverty to be spiritual. Money is the root of all evil. Irish Catholic, good Irish Catholic. Speaking of Neptune again, one of the things that I asked her is, I said, when did you break away from Catholicism? High school. When you're an Irish Catholic, you go to church 6 days a week. And when she was in high school, she finally stood up to her parents and says, no, I am not going anymore. And so she's been through a variety of different things that she has been looking for. And again, she feels that it's led her to the path of evolutionary astrology, and now she's finding these answers that she's been trying to find her whole life. And so as she's been working with EA and working through all this stuff and recognizing that she has lessons in teaching other people to be financially responsible by learning how to say no, starting with her daughter, she made an agreement with her daughter, who has also had addiction issues and been in and out of treatment, she made an agreement with her daughter that as long as she was not into an addiction and as long as she would put herself in college and work to educate herself, she would financially help her through school. If she got caught up in drugs again, got in trouble, or if she left school, the financial support would stop. And so she's really working to ground herself, okay? The second house polarity there, from the retrograde, okay, tossing it over. She has been really working to ground herself and learning how to say no when she needs to. Tying it into that Libra lesson, learning when to say yes, when to say no, when saying no is the greater giving. Okay? Following this, everybody? Clear? Questions? Yes, in the back.
Can you add some comments on stationary direct Neptune and then a transit of stationary direct?
Okay, good. I'll repeat that for some of you in the room. She asked me to comment when Neptune's turned stationary retrograde, stationary direct, and also when we have transiting Neptune on a collective level. Again, because it works so unconsciously in most of us, we don't have a tendency to notice it like we do a Mercury retrograde or a Mars retrograde. We notice those stationary time periods. What you will many times find happens when Neptune turns stationary retrograde is extreme disappointments, extreme disillusions. Something that you have been buying into for so long, whether it's lifetimes or whether it was a marriage of 20 years or whether it was, something that you've created over the last 6 months that you thought was supporting you and it's not your highest and best good. When Neptune has a tendency to turn stationary retrograde, the bottom falls out and you're left in what we call that void. You're left with extreme, disappointment, hurt, pain, loss, depression. This can be one of the indicators of sometimes the suicidal thing. And the purpose of that is to ask you to go within. One of the things we teach in EA is depression is not something that is taboo. We all have a Neptune. We all have Neptune go stationary retrograde. So we all will go through those time periods of having the inner loss and the depression. And it is natural then to go within to try and figure out what's going on. And what has a tendency to happen with Neptune, as it's trying to make you connect in with Source, it's not going to be a nice little answer that just pops up really nice and easy. You have to sit there in the void. The sample that Jeffrey would use early on is think of Neptune as being the ship out in the middle of the ocean and it's foggy. And you got to row yourself back to shore. The only thing you can do is go inside and trust the gut. So when Neptune goes stationary retrograde, it's a time period to go right here. It is a time period to just really go within. And when you get that loss, that depression, whatever it is, ask that famous evolutionary question, why? Why? And I tell people, you ask it till you get the answer, however long it takes, till you get the next step. Now, when Neptune goes stationary direct, it can have some of the opposite effect. It's the ahas. Oh, I've only been in this void for 5 months with transiting Neptune. That's what it was about. That's what I was supposed to figure out. You will have some type of aha that will come along for you that will help you then go on to create new reality that is in touch with spirituality. All right? Again, as Pluto is transiting retrograde, as Neptune is transiting retrograde, and Uranus, it can be helpful to refer to these notes periodically because they work on such a deep level, you're not always going to recognize them. And so you're not always going to be consciously thinking of it. Unless you got one of those real doozers by transit in your chart that doesn't let Neptune get off something. And if you look at this person right here, you can see where transiting Neptune is just getting ready to go over Mercury, it's just getting ready to go over Jupiter. Okay, so I worked with her in helping her understand, there could be more dark nights of the soul that is going to come through. And helping her understand that nothing but a connection and conversations with Source will satisfy her. Okay, that help? Yeah. Was there one more question? Yes.
I just have a terminology question. I'm not clear on what you're meaning when you say things like throw it off or toss it over. Could you explain that in some other terms for me?
Throw it off, release it, let it go. Letting go and second chances, title of my talk. That means just being able to say no, let it go. You know, go into the details of what that means. Talk it out. Give me a reference of how I said it.
You said it several times, the first talk, and you just said it once today. I don't know just when.
Toss it. Toss it off. Oh, I was meaning the same thing. The releasing, the letting go. Okay. Can we move on to Uranus? Okay, go ahead.
Could you characterize when you say resistance in past lives, what those actual situations might have been?
In regards to her? Oh, let me go.
In regards to just evolution and what you mean by that in evolutionary terms.
In regards to resistance in evolutionary terms, it can mean anything and everything. It is for instance, in her case, it's always choosing a partner that she thinks is more powerful than her, but when she gets into the relationship, she recognizes she's the more powerful one. So it's always choosing that weak partner. And this inequality, Libra, paradox of relationship needs, and so then there's always some exit point to the relationship.
So in essence, you're saying resistance is a kind of miscalculation, a mistake of what the evolutionary intention is?
Resistance means repeating that old pattern again and again. It means the addict who always needs another cigarette or another drink of alcohol or another drug. It means the relationship addict who keeps going back to the same unhealthy relating pattern. The name changes, the face changes, but they keep going back to it. It's as simple as always repeating the same type of work pattern. You always find yourself, you know, I have a sister who is struggling to move into first stage individuated via work, and she's still third stage consensus via relationships. But via work, she's always wondering, why do I always end up in these relationships where people pick on me, where her coworkers are always mean to her? And so she, through my mom and I, she's been having Pluto square her Virgo moon 5 times, and so she's starting to recognize her own patterning of drawing in those types of work environments. She's realizing she's resisted moving into a different type of environment. Am I giving the example clearly enough? Yes?
So this is sort of branching off from what Patricia had asked. So do you mean that the evolutionary intent of the retrograde in the contemporary life derives from perhaps past lives where the signature of that planet was not satisfied?
Yes. Some more information in regards to this right here. The current partner that this person is relating to, I don't remember how much time they've been together, off and on for a few years, several years now. They live in different cities, so they don't live together. They see each other every so often. She went to a psychic and had a past life reading in regards to this person, and what she was told was that he was her pimp when she was a prostitute in Rome. See the Libra signature? See it? And so here she is, modern day world, and this person keeps telling her he will make changes along with her because he's not sober. She now is. So we talked about the fact that she's probably going to outgrow this relationship and release this relationship because there is an unhealthy control factor in there. So the example is that there is resistance to the soul to evolving, so that we keep repeating the pattern. We keep repeating the unhealthy karmic patterns. And yes, you can go to past lives to find those patterns, but I give clients choice. You know, when we really want to reach enlightenment, it means we become conscious enough of each and every lifetime we've ever had. But I also tell clients, go with it as you want. You know, sometimes I'll see various indicators in the chart, and I might say, you know, this might be a good time for you to go do regression and hypnotherapy and all that kind of stuff. But I tell them, if, you know, especially those in the beginning stage individuated, if that seems too scary for you, just know that whatever that past life stuff is, you're repeating the pattern in this current life so strongly that if you just work on breaking free of what you want to in this life, you're going to be breaking free of the past life patternings as well. Okay, another thing that can happen whenever you have any of the unconscious planets retrograde, and when you have Saturn retrograde, we'll talk about this, okay? I gotta watch the time here. When you have the unconscious planets retrograde, it is opening the door to having spontaneous past life information come through. And so you can take those stationary retrograde points and you can work with it and see, you can actually go into meditation on your own and work with it to see what's ready to pop up. Okay? Move on to Uranus. Uranus has an 84-year cycle around the sun, which means around the chart. And because these travel so slow, it appears to be the same thing, all right? And so it can almost make it around once in a lifetime. It has a 6-day stationary time period, and it goes retrograde 155 days. Again, approximately 5 months. The 3 outer planets are retrograde approximately 5 months out of the year, out of every year. So again, you can see that we have, a lot of the population at any point in time with the 3 outer planets retrograde, which means the whole process of evolution is trying to take place even on these unconscious levels. See how it's throwing the unconscious, throwing the past up to be worked through? What is the archetype of Uranus? It's the deconditioning, it's the liberating, it's breaking free. It is letting go of the past. The archetypes of Uranus is almost like the archetypes of the principle of retrograde. So when you have Uranus retrograde natally, when we have it go through the transit, it intensifies the breaking free. Another thing that happens with Uranus retrograde is the ability to ultimately detach from everything. Now this will have, we can relate this into evolutionary states. If we're working with the consensus state, it's going to be a little bit harder to have ultimate detachment. If you evolve it up, you look at someone like Jeffrey with Uranus retrograde and look at how he is accelerating the detachment from everything. And it's trying to get you to be to that ultimate state of objectivity, so you can just detach and observe. Uranus retrograde creates the group of one. And many times early on in life, Uranus retrograde, these people are loners. Even when they figure out how to be in a group of like-minded souls later on in life, they're still loners. And they still feel like they're alone all the time. It is accelerating that individuation process umpteen-fold. Getting the point with what I'm saying in regards to this? Now, let me bring in the family, because if we look at this, you see Uranus retrograde 0 degrees Cancer in the 4th house and making a square to the nodal axis. Now here's another way to look at the resolution node for planets when they are square the nodes. You take the planet that's square, because the nodes go clockwise, you go clockwise to the next node, and that's the resolution node. So whenever there's a planet square the nodes, you go clockwise around the chart to the next node, and that's the resolution node. Resolution node means that's the bottom line node that everything must go to in order to recover the skipped steps, in order for evolution and growth to really take place. In this case, it is the north node. But if this happened to be inverted and the south node was right here, then it would mean the south node was the resolution node and always the bottom line node referred to. So it's another way of looking at it. I had Mercury conjunct Neptune. It took me a while to figure out left from right. So I always had to figure things out, telling me a different direction, different way of doing it. But background on this. Here's another evolutionary lesson for you, and I'll try and get myself through all this information, okay? In traditional astrology, we have a tendency to look at the Cancer, 4th house to be indicators of mom, and Capricorn, Saturn, 10th house to be indicators of dad. As we have been as we've been having all the 60s and everything come through in the Aquarian age coming through, how we need to look at it now is the more nurturing parent relates to Moon, Cancer, 4th house. The more authoritarian planet relates to Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house. In this person's case, she had a very close, loving relationship with her father. See Moon in Cancer, but it's in the 5th house. Sometimes the Sun, the Leo, can relate to the father, all right? And see how Uranus at 0 degrees Cancer in the 4th house, making this T-square to the nodal axis, Aries, Libra, 2nd, 8th. It was the mother that she had the harsher relationship in this life. The mother who was in denial of the alcoholism that existed in an Irish Catholic culture. And so when I was talking with her and we were working and preparing for this lecture, I kept going, what has been the trauma in your chart? Have you had abuses of a sexual or physical nature? Have you had emotional abuses that have went on? So we talked for a while, and she came up with 1 or 2 things. But she was like, And when I got here at the conference, she came up to me and she says, man, I had things come up after that conversation. And so even, Uranus is retrograde here in the 4th house, but it's kind of like there's been so much trauma in relationships, both on an intimate level and in the family of origin, most of it being past lives, from what we have been figuring out, that there is bleed through. Now here's another thing about Neptune, just when it happens to be retrograde, especially in the 8th house, irrational fears. And so as we've been working with this Uranus square the nodal axis, what we've been realizing is that she's had irrational fears in this life, and we clue it in and we tie it into Uranus here, and they've been emotional fears of abandonment. You see the 8th house connection, but abandonment by her family. She had a mother who was always late picking her up from school, piano lessons, etc. And so she'd get into these irrational emotions and feelings. My mother's left me. She's abandoned me. One time, her family, when she was young, 5, 6 years old, her family all got up and went to church, and she wasn't awake. They left her sleeping. They lived in these, in the big cities, especially Chicago, if you've ever seen the brownstones, where each level is an apartment and families, extended families would share them. They left an aunt babysitting on another floor, but they all left when she was asleep, and she woke up as this little girl, and she was traumatized because there was no one home. And she was trying to find her family, and she couldn't find her family. So there's this emotional trauma that's been locked up. So what can we take from that? I mean, the thing that came to me that I told her is, I said, it's because your mother literally did abandon you in past lives. And she's always kind of had this a bit of a detached mom in this lifetime. It's her father that's been very nurturing and loving to her. And so she, has, again, all of this trauma that's around this. And what is she needing to work towards with the resolution node? The self-reliance, the inner self-reliance. And because of Uranus connected in Cancer 4th house, there's a need for that emotional self-reliance on a very strong level. So at some point, Uranus wants to throw off, bring to the surface, bring to consciousness, because it's retrograde, these fears, these emotional traumas, so that she can recognize them for what they are and work to release them. She's into adulthood now, and she says she still has issues with abandonment. And she lives alone, and she's taking care of herself very well. But she has these irrational fears of abandonment. This making sense for everybody? Relating to what I'm saying? So when you're born with Uranus retrograde, or, then it goes retrograde by progression, but especially natally, you are a loner a lot until you start to really individuate in whatever evolutionary condition you are in. when you really start to individuate and be uniquely who you are, then you can reconnect into groups that really represent what you're trying to be and what you're trying to do. And all the Uranus retrograde people are sitting here going like this. Shall we do it together? Yes, honey.
Is there any significance to having retrograde planets on the outer planets? Like I have 3 on the out and 1 on the in, or the, the early.
When you have most of your retrograde planets, outer planets, which again is going to be a lot of us because of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto being retrograde 5 months out of the year, that means there's a lot of us that are trying to break free. There's a lot of us that are trying to evolve and let go, decondition. So that's not unusual to have 3 outer planets retrograde, or to have at least, 1 of the outer planets, 2 of the outer planets. Yes?
I understand the north node being the resolution, but since Mars is conjunct the south node, isn't that part of the resolution also? Because it's adding energy to that south node?
Okay, let's take this into consideration. I'll repeat the question for you. She's wanting to know if Mars will be part of the resolution of the skip steps because it is conjunct the south node, and we can also take Neptune in there by relativity with that. Okay, let's back up so we can just help you very briefly. When we have skip steps, as Mark said just before, we go to each of the nodes and we try developing them, but we have not comprehensively developed them. We skip back and forth. When it gets too hard to be self-reliant, she jumps over and she's codependent. When she can't stand the codependency anymore, she jumps back and she works on the self-reliance. So how do we find our way out of it? Again, clockwise from the planet square, there's a resolution node. So self-reliance and learning how to do it, Aries, second house, on her own in every way, is the ultimate answer. But what is happening here? There's all of this trauma that's unconscious, that's trying to come out. There's all of this trauma that keeps pulling her back. Okay? Again, retrograde Neptune can bring out irrational fears. And if you put that in the 8th house, can you imagine all the depths? I mean, this could be someone who could be afraid of being sexually abused, whether she was or not. Okay, she had a close encounter in this life, but we did not uncover anything that actually happened in this life. You can tell from a regression that she had with somebody psychic that there's the trauma that goes all the way back from Rome. Can you see how there's probably been multiple lifetimes where the lover has abandoned her, where the partner has abused her, where the partner has, just completely disappeared overnight? Again, all of this abandonment issues with that. I mean, the scenarios could be endless in how this is happening for her. So what will be interesting to find out in this current situation, in this current relationship she's in, is that she is really moving into taking care of herself while she has a partner who is still in addictions, as he unconsciously feels her pulling away, not even looking at her anything to do with his chart, but as she is pulling away, is he unconsciously going to pick up on her and find some excuse to get out of the relationship again and appear to be the one that abandons her? So it appears that she's, going through all this abandonment again, and it's up to her to recognize how she is really getting to such a point of self-reliance that she's got to recognize she's the one who's ultimately creating this abandonment to help her with the self-reliance, to help her learn these issues of emotional self-reliance, Uranus in Cancer, especially 0 degrees. Okay, following? Yes?
How do you think Pluto will affect it when it moves into her 7th house?
There we go. Or when it moves into her, hold on, let me get it, not 7th house. No, Pluto is up here in her 10th. I mean, this is where she's really taken charge of her life. She's really working with how she's going to choose to leave her job, and what she's looking forward to is doing what she really wants to do in life. Look at all these retrograde planets, later life, figuring out what it is she wants to do. Okay? Yes, one more.
may be having a Mercury moment here.
That's okay.
But help me, if the North Node is the resolution point, and to qualify our understanding of the how even further, going to Mars as the ruler, but Mars is conjunct the South Node. Help me
She
with that
keeps
part.
getting pulled. She keeps getting pulled back to these fears of abandonment.
I understand how it keeps pulling her back in because it's connected to the South Node, but how does it represent the resolution as being the ruler of the North Node?
The resolution node is still going to be the second house. And it means when she gets pulled back into this abandonment, whether it's real or imagined, it is still necessary for her to come over here and take care of herself regardless of her relationship situations.
So basically, because the ruler is conjunct the South, it only really acts to pull her back in. She just has to focus on the
Yes.
North Node. Forget the ruler.
Yes, let's say Mars, let's say she had Mars right here in Aries, conjunct the North Node, she wouldn't be pulled back into the past as much. It would be easier for her to get to this self-reliance. Does that clarify it?
Yeah, so at this point, it really doesn't further help the North Node to go that extra step of the planet. That will-
It's why she is beginning to approach the second Saturn return that she will be doing over the next few years. And she's finally getting it.
There's also an issue, though, with the higher expression of Libra, which is learning how to withhold the giving to
Yes.
the people who otherwise she would have been codependent
Yes.
about.
And that's the big thing that she has done since her sobriety.
So the Mars in that case could strengthen that
Yes.
need and desire in her to say no to the people who otherwise she would have been so needing to say yes to in order to keep in
Yes.
a relationship.
That's exactly what she is doing. That is exactly what she is doing. Everybody else hear that? Okay with that? Okay, so so as we're looking at Libra being a lesson of when to give and when not to give, as she has been working to really become self-reliant, she can metamorphosis Mars conjunct the South Node, and she can learn to say no. She can learn to be the one to cut it off, 8th house. The death of giving. Yes, the death of unhealthy giving. Let's put it that way. Okay, I think I know we started late, so my little clock's not working. Okay, good, we got time for Saturn. We're not going to forget Saturn. Okay, if we move on and get Saturn in, and then we can finish up with questions in whatever way. So let me have the little glass of water. Saturn has a revolution around the sun of 29 and a half years. It goes retrograde, this is the part I don't remember, it goes retrograde for 140 days each year, so about 4.5 months. And its stationary time period is 5 days. Stationary retrograde 5 days, stationary direct 5 days. So the archetype of Saturn, as we have learned, is the individuated consciousness. It is how we create our space-time reality. It's how we structure our ability to be conscious. It's how we structure our ability to function and live in the world. It is how we start to move into collective groups. Jupiter exposes us to expanding beyond ourselves. Saturn then gives us the boundaries of how we are going to go in and conform to the group. Uranus will come along and liberate us when we've done too much conforming. So we got this idea of Saturn through the weekend. When Saturn goes retrograde, the door to the unconsciousness is open. When Saturn is direct, there is resistance to the unconsciousness. When Saturn is retrograde, the door to the unconsciousness opens. So if you have a natal Saturn retrograde, the door to your unconsciousness is open for this entire lifetime. You are not as resistant to holding on as Saturn has a tendency to be. And if it does that by progression, then when that happens in your chart by progression, it means you start opening up to what's unconscious within you. When Saturn does it by transit, there's a window for all of us to open up the unconsciousness. All right? This makes sense for everybody?
There's a stationary deeper impact in the birth chart when Saturn is stationary,
Oh,
retrograde?
just like I said yesterday, you need to look in your ephemerises, because if you,
It was stationary direct in my chart.
and it was close to being stationary direct?
Retrograde.
Stationary retrograde. Stationary retrograde. So that means, again, there, depending on if it was it retrograde, it's retrograde, but it's stationary retrograde.
Correct.
That means it's just busting wide open. If it was stationary retrograde, but it had not went retrograde yet, it means the resistance was just as much as it could get, and it was about ready to bust. Okay? And the opposite effect over the direct. Okay? When you have Saturn around stationary direct, you have been opening up to the consciousness, unconsciousness for a whole bunch, a lot, you know my words. That now you've got to get your feet on the ground again. That now you've got to be able to be stable and be okay in your world again when it's stationary direct. You had a question, hon?
Yes, Kimberly, let's see if I can remember the question. When Saturn goes retrograde, does it then make it more easy or possible to act out what's behind those closed doors so that one becomes aware of them?
Yes, it can. It can also be easier when Saturn goes retrograde to understand what's behind those closed doors or what's in the unconsciousness. Saturn retrograde is rebellion from the status quo. It's rebellion from authority. It's rebellion from whatever is trying to force you to conform. And so, this is the early rebel. A Saturn retrograde is almost like a little bit of Uranus, because you're trying to throw off all that conforming. You've had past lives where you've done too much conforming. So you're here to throw it off. Yes?
If you have both Uranus and Saturn retrograde and conjunct?
Good question. New phase or balsamic? Do you know?
No.
Okay, give me the degree of Saturn and the degree of Uranus. Do you know?
Hold on.
Mercury retrograde
13 degrees. Wait a minute. Uranus is 4 Gemini, and Saturn is 12 Gemini.
So it's new phase. Let's just talk about it generically first for the benefit of everybody. All right? Let's look at these scenarios because Saturn and Uranus have a tendency to be antithetical to each other, all right, resistant to each other. Saturn, the boundaries of the individuated consciousness. Uranus, the beginning of the individuated unconsciousness. So in Saturn's retrograde, it's open to Uranus, okay? And so when we have both Saturn retrograde and Uranus retrograde, a double whammy of breaking free and deconditioning. And you got Saturn, in your case, new phase to Uranus. It's like, don't fence me in. Especially Gemini. I mean, you're not going to be stable with anything for very long, and so just be okay going with the flow and living in about, umpteen different houses this lifetime. Just one example. But what if we have Saturn direct and we have Uranus retrograde? Then see how that intensifies the resistance. Saturn is still direct, but Uranus is retrograde, and Uranus is wanting to throw it off, and Saturn is going, no. So you see the effects, and you see how it works, so you can use it in your own charts with that. And if you have both of them direct, they're each doing their thing. Saturn trying to resist the changes, and Uranus trying to push them on. It's just not quite as intense as when Saturn's retrograde, or Saturn direct, Uranus retrograde. Someone raise their hand.
I wasn't clear, did she have them both retrograde?
Both retrograde.
So wouldn't that be the opposite? Wouldn't that be both?
No. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. See, Mercury's retrograde. That's why. No, Uranus is at 4 degrees Gemini and Saturn's at 12. So it's new phase.
They're both retrograde.
But they're both retrograde, so it intensifies the throwing off.
So Saturn isn't balsamic to the
Uranus is the slower moving. Uranus is the slower moving planet.
Yeah.
Yes, there, she said it. Thank you. It's natural motion. It doesn't matter whether the planets are retrograde or not. Saturn is still, 8 degrees beyond Uranus. Okay, everybody following with what I'm saying? Yes?
Would the Saturn retrograde phenomenon of the absent father have to do anything with opening up the unconscious?
Saturn retrograde does not necessarily mean there will be an absent parent. Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Saturn retrograde does not necessarily mean there will be an absent parent. There is a common tendency when Saturn is retrograde, you have some type of detachment from the parents. In other words, you don't have as much emotional connection to your parents as you do when Saturn is direct, because the Saturn retrograde, what it's trying to affect is a rebellion against status quo and authority, and the first place you're going to learn how to do that is the parents. So there's a tendency on a generic level for a Saturn retrograde soul to have, to be working to detach from the parents. But that doesn't mean the parents will be gone. In this particular case, this person had both of her parents, and in this case, to just work with the Saturn retrograde thing just a little bit in regards to this, all right? Remember how we said in her case the more nurturing parent was the father? The father's a Cancer, and his sun sits right on her moon, okay? And the father was the most nurturing, giving, loving person to her. He was like she was. He was a giver. He was a very humble, honest soul. He was a semi-famous cop in Chicago back in the 60s with the Democratic Convention and all that stuff that came through. The policemen would rise up to certain levels to be commanders, and there'd be like a half a dozen of them around the city. Her father was the only one who was not indicted and arrested when they had the big scandal with the Chicago police. But he was on that very giving, loving, nurturing end. So look what she started picking up from father. I'm the giver. I will just give until she had to learn to rebel from that and learn when not giving was the greater giving, as we talked earlier. Her father, incidentally, was also the person who gave her her first astrology book. And he couldn't remember why he did it. She thought he gave it to her one year for Christmas when she was in high school. And so then years later, when she really started getting into astrology, she came back and asked, "Dad, what made you do that?" And I don't know, there was no answer. He couldn't remember why. But he was the one who turned her on to astrology. So is this helping for everybody? Yeah. Clear enough on Saturn retrograde? Oh, let's do stationary retrograde and stationary direct, okay? When Saturn turns stationary retrograde, ugh. It's like, when Saturn is transiting in the sky and it does its stationary retrograde, it can be one of the most common times when we really get depressed or low, or something we were really trying to create and make a physical reality doesn't manifest and gets blown out of the water. And so when that happens and Saturn turns retrograde like that, it's kind of asking you to go over to Neptune and ask, Pluto, Uranus, all of them, and really, ask the why. But that when Saturn turns stationary retrograde, it can be a sinking time. Not always. It will only do that if it's not working with what is your soul's next evolutionary step. A more positive way of maybe seeing it is sometimes what it will mean is just a delay, because it's not time to manifest it yet in that space-time reality. So you will go through the Saturn retrograde and you will figure it out a little bit better, and then when Saturn goes direct, then it can have that manifestation. Now that Saturn stationary direct time period, that's about really figuring out what it is you want to put into manifestation, what you want to make real for you. You can get your ahas when that comes along on a transit time period. And if you were born during, a Saturn stationary retrograde, you're really stuck and needing to break free. And if you were born during a Saturn stationary direct time period, it's almost like you've been wandering in the unconsciousness for so long that now you got to ground yourself again. Now you've got to learn how to make real and function in the world. Yes?
You said Saturn retrograde is like having the door to the unconscious open. Is
Mhm.
that similar to Saturn in Pisces?
Yes, it can be. Yes?
If a soul chose to be born with Saturn stationary retrograde, could that mean they're doing some karma stuff and they're just kind of hobbling themselves, like tying their feet together or something?
If a soul is born with Saturn retrograde,
Stationary retrograde.
might
they be hobbling themselves in order to complete some certain karma?
Okay, let's break it down. Let's look at stationary retrograde before it turns retrograde and after it turns retrograde. Saturn stationary retrograde, but before it actually appears to turn retrograde from Earth, okay, means there is an intense resistance, and the soul is trying its darndest to just hold on to whatever it is that represents security. If it is after it appears to go retrograde, it's like a day or two after the retrograde, but it's still stationary retrograde because it's stationary, like about 5 days, okay? Then it's just blowing everything that represents reality wide open. And it may be that one common example, again, everything else in the chart, has to be mitigated in. But you could look at the example of if it's right after it turned retrograde, this person just can't seem to stabilize because they've been in so much resistance to where they're needing to grow that their soul is going to intend that they are going to be floating around in the unconsciousness in this life just to get them to open up all the resistance, Saturn. Other questions on any subject? Yes?
If you have Pluto retrograde with North Node conjunct, Pluto's at 8 degrees, Virgo, North Node 9 now. Is that a new phase or a balsamic phase?
Good question. Pluto at 8, retrograde, North Node at 9. It's a new phase conjunction. Now, back on the table by the speaker's materials, there are 3 sheets that are handouts. One is the cycle of phases and aspects. Dane Rudier was the first person that, in most common astrology, started working with the 8 lunar phases. And when I first started studying Jeffrey's material, I found EA in 1985. In 1986, Jeffrey had a handout, and that's where that originates, that handout that's back there. And then there's 2 other pages for it, how to compare phases and aspects of all planets and how to compare phases and aspects of all the nodes. So, let me give you a long answer here, okay? Since I've taken over being director of the correspondence course, this Mercury retrograde represents the 3rd Mercury retrograde. The directions have changed on aspects to the nodes. So the handouts that are back there are correct. Until the next retrograde. I was like, no kidding. Right before Mercury went retrograde, Adina sent me an email because she's going through Jeffrey's 4 years of the message board, and she's going, Kim, in 70% of the examples, this is what it is. So I emailed Jeffrey and I asked him, and he said, that's right. And I said, but that's not what we decided on in the last Mercury retrograde. However, what it is now is kind of what I had originally thought. It's what matches Pluto 1, and it's very simple to understand. So here's the lesson, okay? We take any planet and you go clockwise to the next node, and that's what phase it is, all right? So the North Node is making a crescent first quarter square to Uranus. If the North Node was 0 degrees Cancer, it'd be an exact first quarter square. This is a crescent phase square. Everything is reversed, all right? No matter what the planet is, all of the planets, you take the nodes clockwise from that planet to find the phase and the aspect. Each planet going clockwise individually, or excuse me, each node. So if the north node, okay, is making a crescent square to Uranus, that means the south node is making the disseminating square to Uranus. Vernon?
I thought it was based on the speed of the planet.
No. Correct what was happening in the last Mercury retrograde. Are you confused?
Just tell me which one, I'll do it.
I know, you can imagine me, I'm preparing all this stuff back there and getting the conference ready and deal with all your registrations, and Adina emails me, oh, by the way. I called her up on the phone. Don't do this to me. But it makes sense. And if you go back there and look at the actual directions, it's, again, a 3-sheet handout. It is so simple. It's the way it should have always been. All right, my tape's done. What? Go ahead. All the retrogrades in one house, you look at that house as having the archetypes of that house having a lot of resistance to growth, and you work to help them understand the archetypes of that house, where they are in resistance to that, and how they can affect the growth of that house. Get a lot of information from the polarity house. Thank you.